Welcome to the congregation of Yahweh in Panama City, Florida. This is the Day of Atonement. It's known as Yom Kippur in Hebrew. And this is the day that Yahweh has pointed out to our salvation what the atonement is. And it begins on the 10th day of Tishri on the Hebrew calendar. Some people say, well, why do you think that this is important? Well, it's important because Yeshua passed salvation to the people by his death on the stake, and he became our atonement. And it's good that we understand why Yahweh planned it this way. He set it up for his people, and he goes back in Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 26. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, on the 10th day of the 7th month is the day of atonement. It shall be a set-apart gathering for you, and you shall afflict your beings, and shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh. Now, this feast, like any other feast, is a memorial. It's described as a memorial in the Scripture, and the Hebrew word zikrun means memorial. It's a memento, a memory, or of a place or a thing. So this day is a memorial to remind us what Yahweh has established for his people in the process of salvation. And the restriction on this day is you do no work on the same day. For it is the Day of Atonement, to make for you before Yahweh your Elohim. And we ask, is it too hard for us to take a day off because of the importance of this, what Yahweh has approved of and has provided for us? We should honor that. And it's also in the next verse, in 29, it says, for any being who is not afflicted on that same day shall be cut off from his people. See, it's important enough that Yahweh commanded us to be afflicted. And the affliction is a minor thing for us as a memorial. It's not a ceremony, it's just a memorial. And the affliction is a short day's fast. But it is like an object lesson. Fasting makes us remember what it's for. It's very important. Verse 30, and in any being who does any work on that day, that being I shall destroy from the midst of his people. Now this is another key point that the way Yahweh put it. If anybody's going to be chastised, Yahweh's going to chastise them. We're not going to chastise each other. We're not going to chastise other people. And we shouldn't, and that's been one of the problems in the world today. Everybody's right and want everybody else to do it like they want to do it, and so they do that. But we need to let Yahweh perform his work. Give us the encouragement to receive what he has planned for us. Verse 31, you do no work, a law forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. Now this key verse here is one that's skipped over a lot, because Israel was carried away into captivity, and everybody in modern times seems to think that what this book is written about is old ancient Israel, and it's already been done. It's back in the past, and we're up here in the future now, and that has nothing to do with us. But they're wrong, because it was spoken by Yahweh himself that it would be forever. in our dwellings, no matter where we're sent. See, what people don't realize that when Israel was carried away into captivity, they didn't cease to exist. They were just scattered. They were planted in other countries. They were driven from one country to another, and they're still being driven today. We are the most driven people in the world today, and we're not all Jews. There's only one tribe of Jews. There's 12 tribes of other Israel. There's really 13 houses. And when you really study the scripture and see that he is talking about the whole, and Israel is also the prince of the world, according to the scripture, and when he is fulfilled what he is supposed to do, Yahweh will bring back salvation to this world. He says, it is a Sabbath of rest for you. So today is considered a Sabbath. We call it a high Sabbath because it's not on the weekly Sabbath. And it says what we will do when we're resting today. And I think all of us rested pretty good today, anticipating what we have coming up with the next feast that follows this one, and also getting prepared. He says, and you shall afflict your beings. Now this is the way you afflict your being. You personally, yourself, on the 9th day of the month at even. And this is another key. The days do not start at midnight. They do not end at midnight. They end and start at sundown. So that's the key too. So from even to even you shall observe the Sabbath. So you can use this terminology. From sundown to sundown you can observe the Sabbath. The weekly Sabbath is from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. So it's from sundown to sundown. So that's what this day is all about. That we are to follow the instruction that our Father gave us in the Scriptures. And He didn't separate it Old Testament, New Testament, and some of it don't matter anymore. All of it matters. And we have to learn to reason and study and find out what He wants us to know. In Leviticus chapter 16 and verse 1, this is the order of how this got started. It said in chapter 16, verse 1, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe after the death of the two sons of Aaron, as they drew near before Yahweh and died. And Yahweh said to Moshe, speak to Aaron, your brother. Now this is the instruction that Yahweh was passing on to Aaron, because Aaron was the oldest and he became the high priest. He said, speak to Aaron, your brother, not to come in at all times in the set-apart place inside the veil before the lid of the atonement, which is on the ark, lest he die, because I appear in the cloud above the lid of atonement. And this is the instruction that Yahweh placed on them when He was establishing Israel in the wilderness, when they were using the tabernacle as the meeting place, and that Yahweh was making a physical connection with the tribe and putting them together. And so this was the instruction. And then he goes on to say, and Aaron, and this Aaron should come into the set-apart place with the blood of the young bull as a sin offering and a ram as a burnt offering. And see, this was physical things that they had to do as a training exercise to learn what Yahweh was eventually going to do in the future. But this is the way it was established. In the 4th verse, he says, he should put on the set-apart linen long shirt with linen trousers on his flesh and gird himself with a linen girdle, and be dressed with the linen turban. They are set-apart garments, and shall bathe his body in water, and shall put them on. And from the congregation of the children of Israel he takes 2 male goats as a sin offering, and 1 ram as a burnt offering. And Aaron shall bring the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself, and make an atonement for himself and for his house. And the word atonement comes from the Hebrew word in Strong's 3722 is kafar, and its primitive root is to cover, especially with bitumen, or figuratively to expiate or condone, to placate or counsel. It's to appease, to make an atonement, to cleanse, disannul, forgive, be merciful, pacify, pardon, and to pitch, purge away, put off, and make a reconciliation. Now, when you begin to think about what Yeshua did for the people in modern times, and in specifically doing it today for this generation, because it's still continuing, he was able to make atonement for his people. And this atonement he is shown in his mercy and his love for his people. And that's the reason we need to remind ourselves of where it come from, study these scriptures, and find out the real basis of what Scripture is, because there's a lot of traditional understanding of Scriptures that a lot of stuff has been overlooked. In verse 7, Leviticus 16 and verse 7, said, "And he shall take the 2 goats and let them stand before Yahweh at the door of the tent of meeting." The 2 goats, one was to be as a sacrifice, and one was to be as it's called an azal in Hebrew, but it's like a scapegoat. It's one that was supposed to bear the sins of the people, and it was delivered into the wilderness with the strong man, and so that is a pictorial view of what Yeshua did on the stake, and we'll discuss that in a few minutes. In verse 9 it says, verse 8, "And Aaron cast lots for the 2 goats, one lot for Yahweh, and the other lot for Azazel." Verse 9, "And Aaron shall bring the goat on which the lot for Yahweh fell, and shall prepare it as a sin offering." And see, he took special care to make this particular goat to be a sin offering. And he says, "But the goat on which the lot of the Azazel fell is caused to stand alive before Yahweh, to make atonement upon it, and send it into the wilderness to Azazel." In other words, symbolically, they laid the sins of the people on the goat, and he was led into the wilderness to take away the sin. And when we look at Yeshua's execution, he did more than just the sacrifice. The sacrificial offering of the blood paid the sin debt. He hung on the stake, and darkness came upon him, and he took on himself the whole sins of the world. And he was carried away into the wilderness of darkness for 3 days and 3 nights. And he symbolically, this reading here shows that he bare all of the sins of the people. And then while he was in the grave and came to the resurrection, he came up at the exact time that they cut the wave sheaf offering for the acceptable offering, and he became our wave sheaf offering at that time. And another thing about the offerings, there's one little side note here. In Exodus chapter 30 and verse 15, he says, "The rich does not give more, and the poor does not give less than the half a shekel, which when you give a contribution to Yahweh to make atonement for yourselves." In other words, the gift that you give to Yahweh is equal, is what he's talking about. And he says, "And you shall take a silver of the atonement from the children of Israel and give it for the service of the tent of meetings, and it shall be to the children of Israel for a remembrance before Yahweh to make atonement for yourselves." And so that's the reason we observe this day. Even Nehemiah made one preparation for it. In Nehemiah chapter 10 and verse 33, he says, "For the showbread and for the continual grain offerings and for the continual burnt offerings of the Sabbaths and of the new moons, for the appointed times and for the set-apart offerings and for the sin offerings, to make atonement for Israel and all the work of the house of our Elohim." See, this is done for all Israel. And if we could get our minds on it, it's probably all Israel from the past right on up till the future, even past us. It's forever. And then we come to the New Testament about Yeshua and how he provided for us. In Romans chapter 5 and verse 1, he says, "Therefore, having been declared right by belief, we have peace with Elohim through our Master Yeshua Messiah." See, when we come to the knowledge and understanding of Yahweh, and we come to repentance, and we have been declared right in our belief. Romans 5 and 1. Verse 2. "Through whom also we have access by belief into this favor in which we stand. And we exult in the expectation of the esteem of Elohim. And not only this, but we also exult in pressures, knowing that pressure works endurance, and endurance approvedness, and approvedness expectation, and expectation does not disappoint." See, it's life. We have the cares of life that we work with and we go through, we endure, and we reach maturity by accomplishment. He said, "Because the love of Elohim has been poured out in our hearts by the set-apart Spirit which was given to us." Now, when you can just envision that day that he hung on that cross, the love of Yahweh to his people, and it was given to us of what he accomplished. He says, "For when we were still weak, Messiah in due time died for the wicked." This lets us understand that there's nothing we can really do ceremonially or physically or monetarily or ever how that's going to earn us anything with Yahweh. It's just not possible. But Yahweh did it to save the wicked. And he says, "For one shall hardly die for a righteous one, though possibly for a good one some would even dare to have the courage to die. But Elohim proves his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Messiah died for us." And see, this is more emphasized on this day because this is the day of atonement, and we're looking back at the atonement that he applied to his creation, and we are the recipients of it. He says, "Much more then, having now been declared right by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him. For if, being enemies, we were restored to favor with Elohim through the death of his Son. Much more, having been restored to favor, we shall be saved by his life. And that's the reason we have the desire to live for him and to follow him and to be taught by him and to be encouraged by him, be led by him, is because he has provided for us salvation beyond the imagination of the human brain. There's no one can really comprehend what all has been accomplished just in these few verses I've just read. He says, and not only this, but we also exult in Elohim through our Master, Yeshua Messiah. He is our Messiah. He says, through whom we have now received the restoration to favor. Because he did that and he has called it to our attention and we believe, we have repented, then we have received the restoration to favor. This generation today can have favor with Yahweh when they understand that. He says, for this reason, even as through one man sin did enter into the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because all sinned. All have sinned. No one can, we can't even say, well, mine was a little white sin, or, a light sin, or what. It makes no difference. All sin is sin. It's contrary to Yahweh. And Yahweh has forgiven sin and made propitiation for it. He said, verse 13, for until the Torah, sin was in the world, but sin is not reckoned when there is no Torah. In other words, the Torah is the teaching. The word that was translated into English as law is really the word Torah, which means teaching. It's judgment. Judgment is rulership. It is the right way to rule. It is the rule to live, to rule by fatherly instruction, by being the protector and not the privileged ruler that abuses the people. He says, but death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who had not sinned according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam. So the light sins was still ruled over till Moses. The heavy sins still ruled over with Moses. He says, who is a type of him who was to come. Now, he's preparing for one to come, and these were the types. When we read the Old Testament books, we're reading some types. We're reading some instruction. They're very valuable to read. There is no ceremony that you can keep that'll make it right, but there is some studying that will give you faith. He says, but the favorable gift is not like this trespass. For if by the one man's trespass many died, much more the favor of Elohim, the gift in favor of the one man, Yeshua Messiah, overflowed the many. See, everything that mankind has done, Yahshua has overflowed it with deliverance. Verse 16, and the favorable gift is not as by one having sinned, for indeed the judgment was of one to condemnation, but the favorable gift is of many trespasses unto righteousness. For if by the trespasses of one death did reign through one, much more those who receive the overflowing favor of the gift of righteousness shall reign in life through the one, Yeshua Messiah. Can we imagine just what that really feels like when we understand it? Verse 18, so then, as through one trespass, there resulted condemnation to all men. And also, through one righteous act, there resulted righteous declaring of life to all men. See, Yeshua paid the death debt. The wages of sin is death. So therefore, death has to occur in order to pay for the sin. So in order to receive life, Yeshua had to provide for that, and that's what he did. In verse 19, he says, "For as through the disobedience of one man many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the one many shall be made righteous." The obedience of our Messiah, Yahshua HaMashiach, who walked this earth, who had his ministry on this earth and accomplished what his Father commanded him to do, he brought life. For as through the disobedience of one man many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of one many shall be made righteous. And the Torah came in beside, so that the trespass would increase. But where sin increased, favor increased still more. See, the idea that sin has stopped righteousness is made manifest here, because he has made it to where he is going to overcome sin. And his favor to the people is manifest in that he died for the unrighteous. He died for the sinner. And that's what he's trying to tell us. He says, so that as sin did reign in death, even so favor might reign through righteousness to everlasting life through Yeshua, Messiah, our Master. And that's why we need to be encouraged to live for him. And in the things that's going on right now in the world, we have a lot of trouble, and people are wondering how it's going to turn out. Nobody can tell you exactly what's happening. Nobody can tell you how to deliver yourself. There's all kind of people trying, though. But there's one answer that this generation, if we understand what it is, it will bring about our salvation. And that is that this people that's in this earth, and especially in the United States right now, would be the first one to start to find out who they are and to find out what they need to do. And that because they're living in a time when our government is in turmoil and could fall at any minute. Our economy is already in such teetering shape that it could just dissipate. Our resources have been isolated and captured away from the people to the point to where they don't have access to them anymore. And things could be in terrible shape pretty quick. And not only that, we have enemies already walking on our soil from people who come in from foreign countries that's wanting to destroy this people. And we have ties with people in the world that could be shackles that will drag us down as a nation. But there is salvation. There is a point. And this point is the prayer of Solomon. And if people understood the prayer of Solomon on this Day of Atonement, it would be a good time to dedicate to the application of what Solomon does. But we need to understand a little bit about this prayer, because Solomon's prayer was inspired by Yahweh. It was not that Solomon was smart enough to do it. It was not that he was even privileged to do it. Yahweh inspired Solomon because Solomon was a servant to Yahweh, and this is what we need to get from this. in 2 Chronicles chapter 6 and verse 1. Then Shlomo said, Yahweh has said he would dwell in the dark cloud. Now, the scenario of Solomon's prayer begins with him standing on the platform talking to the people in the presence of the dedication of the temple. And he was bringing the message that Yahweh was going to deal with them. And listen to this. He says, but I have built you an exalted house and a place for you to dwell in forever. See, he was fulfilling what Yahweh said that he would do from the promise of his father. Continuing on, verse 3. And the sovereign turned around and blessed all the assembly of Israel, while all the assembly of Israel stood. And now to get this picture, the dedication of the temple was in Jerusalem, and it was a large place, and many of the people were standing in the ceremony as this was being accomplished. And he said, blessed be Yahweh Elohim of Israel, who has filled with his hands what he spoke with his mouth to my father David, saying. Now this is Solomon speaking to the people, telling them that Yahweh has fulfilled the words that he gave to David. He says, from the day that I brought my people out of the land of Mitzrayim, or Egypt, I have chosen no city for any tribe of Israel in which to build a house for my name to be there, nor did I choose any man to be a leader over my people Israel. But I have chosen Jerusalem for my name to be there, and I have chosen David to be over my people Israel. Now this is the inspired prayer that Yahweh spoke through Solomon in order to get the attention of the people and let them understand. He says, and it was in the heart of my father David to build a house for the name of Yahweh Elohim of Israel. See, David, if you remember ever reading about David communing with Yahweh, they talked about building the house. And David and Yahweh said, you won't build the house because you have blood on your hands, and it'll be left to your son. So here's the fulfillment of it. He says, but Yahweh said to my father David, because it was in your heart to build a house for my name, you did well in that it was in your heart. It was a good thing that David thought that way. He says, but you do not build the house for your son who comes forth from your loins. He does build the house for my name. And this house is for the name of Yahweh. It's not for the name of the Jews, or not for the name of Israel, or any other name. It's Yahweh himself. We have to think about it that way. Everything is pointed directly to Yahweh's purpose. He says, now Yahweh has established his word, which he spoke, and I have been raised up instead of my father David, and sit on the throne of Israel, as Yahweh promised, and I have built the house for the name of Yahweh Elohim of Israel. In other words, the work has been done. And there I have placed the ark, in which it is the covenant of Yahweh, which he made with the children of Israel. Now you go back and read that original covenant that Yahweh made with the children of Israel. It was established, and it does not go away. It's not just buried in some ark of the covenant somewhere and hid and nobody can get their hands on it. The covenant exists in reality. If they never find the ark, if Yahweh has hidden it good enough that no human being ever looks at it again, the covenant exists. It's Yahweh's promise to man. He says, and he stood before the altar, and Yahweh in front of all of the assembly of Israel, and spread out his hands. Now he is describing here his position with the people and where he was when this was made or done. He said, verse 13, for Shlomo, who made a bronze platform 5 cubits long and 5 cubits broad and 3 cubits high, and had put it in the midst of the court, and he stood on it and knelt down on his knees before all the assembly of Israel, and spread out his hands toward the heavens. Now you can imagine the king on this bronze platform in the presence and company of all Israel that was alive at that point, and he's looking toward heaven. Verse 14, and said, Yahweh Elohim of Israel, there is no Elohim in the heavens or in the earth like you. He recognized the oneness and the unity of Yahweh and the power of Yahweh. Guarding the covenant and kindness with your servant who walk before you with all their heart. Guarding the covenant. That's the reason I said that the covenant exists. Yahweh guards the covenant. If no man ever sees a book or a scribe or a scroll or whatever, the covenant exists because Yahweh guards it. He said, who has guarded with you what you promised your servant David my father? Indeed, you have both spoken with your mouth and filled with your hand as it is this day. Yahweh has accomplished it. The hand of Yahweh is in control. He said, now, Yahweh Elohim of Israel, guard what you promised your servant David, my father, saying, there is not to cease a man of yours before me sitting on the throne of Israel, only if your sons guard their ways to walk in my Torah as you have walked before me. Now, it would have been a perfect thing if they had accomplished that and walked before him. But he goes on to say, and now, O Yahweh Elohim of Israel, let your word come true, which you have spoken to your servant David. For it is true, Elohim dwells with men on the earth. Elohim is in the presence of us today. We're here on his Sabbath day. We're gathered together, and he says we're two or more, and we're multiple, so Yahweh's in our presence, or we are in the presence of Yahweh. He said, see, the heavens and the heavens of the heavens are unable to contain you. How much less this house shall I have built, which I have built? See, even the heavens can't contain Yahweh of his greatness. But he can come down and contact individuals. He understands that. He says, yet shall you turn to the prayer of your servant and his supplication. And see, this is an inspired prayer by Solomon. Yahweh caused him to say these words like this. He says, O Yahweh my Elohim, to listen to the cry, to the prayer which your servant is praying before you, for your eyes to be open toward this house day and night, toward this place. You have said to put your name there, to listen to the prayer which your servant prays toward this place. So when you think your prayers are empty, don't give up hope. Yahweh hears your prayer. You pray to him. He says, verse 21, and shall give heed to the supplications of your servant and to your people, Israel, when they pray toward this place, and hear from your dwelling place in the heavens, and shall hear and forgive. So when the people pray, when we pray as people today of Yahweh, Yahweh hears and forgives. That's his way of handling sin. He says, if anyone sins against his neighbor, and he has lifted up an oath on him to cause him to swear, and comes and swears before your altar in this house, and then hear in the heavens and act rightly rule your servants, repaying the wrong by bringing his way to his own head, and declare right and righteous by giving according to his righteousness. See, Yahweh wants us to pray rightly. And that's the reason we need to understand more about how he handles prayer and how he receives prayer. Verse 24. And now this is the condition of the world. And we didn't get here overnight. We have been driven. Now just listen to it and let it soak in. And if your people, Israel, are smitten before the enemy because they have sinned against you, and they shall turn back and confess your name and pray and make supplication before you in this house. You see, Israel sinned, Israel was carried away into captivity, but they have this out. He says, then hear in the heavens and forgive the sin of your people Israel, and bring them back to the land which you gave to them and their fathers. You see, he's pushed Israel throughout the world now, and this is the state we're in today. And this is the prayer that Solomon was inspired to pray for relief. He says, when the heavens are shut up and there is no rain because they have sinned against you, and they shall pray toward this place and confess your name, turn from their sin, because you afflict them. The reason we are afflicted is because of our sin. And we have an out for it because we can turn back to him. And he inspired Solomon to pray this prayer to encourage people to do just that. He says in verse 27, then hear in the heavens and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel, for you teach them the good way in which they should walk. Now, why should we keep commandments? It's a good way in which to walk. It's the righteous way. He says, and shall send rain on your land, which you have given your people as an inheritance. Yahweh can control the rain. He can send enough. He can send too much when it's necessary. He can withhold, but he can do it right when we get right. That's what he's talking about. When there is scarcity of food in the land, when there is pestilence or blight, or mildew, locusts or grasshoppers, when their enemies distress them in the land of their cities, any plague or any sickness. Does this sound like what America is going through with today? We just had our sovereign land in Libya invaded and our representative there killed. And this nation needs to think about things like that and find out what our remedy is going to be. He says, whatever prayer, whatever supplication is made by anyone or by all your people Israel, when each one knows his own plague and his own grief and spreads out his hands to this house. If you know what you need to pray for it. If you don't, pray anyway. Yahweh will reveal it to you. He says, then hear from the heavens your dwelling place, and forgive and give to everyone according to all his ways, whose heart you know. Yahweh knows our heart, no matter who we are. No one is exempt from Yahweh understanding his heart. So we can't separate ourselves and say he's a sinner and he don't go in our way, or, you know the religious vernacular. Don't worry about that. He says, for you alone know the hearts of the Son of men. Yahweh knows the hearts of the sons of men. He says, so that they fear you to walk in your way as long as they live in the land which you give to our fathers. We're not here by accident. Our forefathers, you can look at the trek that our forefathers took 4 or 5 generations back that we can catalog, and probably a little further on some, and how they migrated to the west. And today, this country right here is the only country that's ever really fulfilled the entire promise of Abraham, with all the riches and the importance that the nation has in the world. He said, verse 32, also concerning the foreigners, who is not your people, Israel. See, there are people out there that are not of Israel, but who come from a far land for the sake of your great name and your strong hand and outstretched arm, and they come and pray to this in this house. These people out there can come and pray too. Yahweh will receive them. They are still His inheritance. All humanity is the inheritance of Yahweh. But if you understand what He's talking about, He's dealing with Israel because Israel is supposed to hear. And then when Israel don't hear, He deals with the ones that will hear. And then He is going to work it out to where He's going to make restoration of His creation. Now here is verse 33. Then hear from the heavens your dwelling place, and do according to all which the foreigner calls to you for, so that all the people of the earth know your name and fear you, and do your people Israel, as do your people Israel, and to know that is this house which I have built is called by your name. See, most people that know anything about literature or religious writings knows this story. It's common in just about every nation. And He's still praying. When your people go out to battle against their enemies in the way that you send them, and they shall pray to you toward this city which you have chosen, and toward the house which I have built in your name, then shall you hear from the heaven their prayer and their supplication, and maintain their cause. So if we go out in the world as a nation to do battle with other nations in conflicts like we have done in the past, and you can go back as far as you want to go, but we're pretty fresh on World War I, World War II, and all the conflicts in between. We need to let Yahweh have His way. And this is the prayer. Verse 36. When they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin. See, nobody can exonerate himself from sin, or say he didn't sin, or deny his sin. You know, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. That's the attitude that most of the world's got. He says, and you become enraged with them and give them to the enemy, and they take them captive to a land far or near. That's what happened to our ancestors when they were removed from Israel. They were taken to a foreign land. And when they survived, they lost their identity. And they grew up into other nations, and they migrated to other nations, and then they built empires, and the empires fell, and they moved to other nations. And the history goes on. It's called Western civilization in academia. You can study some of it. He wants them to understand that He's still in charge of their welfare. And here in verse 37 he says, and they shall turn back unto their heart in the land where they have been taken captive, and shall turn and make supplication to you in the land of their captivity. See, we're in the land of our captivity, so to speak. We need to make supplication at this point, today, not wait for the future or not look back at the past, but today recognize who we are. Saying, we have sinned, we have acted crookedly, and have done wrong. And when they return to you with all their heart and with all their being in the land of their captivity, where they have been taken themselves captive, and they shall pray toward their land, which you gave to their fathers, and the city which you have chosen, and toward the house which I have built in your name. Now, this gives us a background of how Solomon led up to the true prayer. And then shall you hear from the heavens, your dwelling place, their prayer and their supplication, and maintain their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you. Yahweh wants to forgive all the people that have sinned against him. He says, now, my Elohim, I pray, let your eyes be open and let your ears be attentive to the prayer of this place. That's one good reason for us to have this day to celebrate atonement as a special set-apart day. It's a time for us to pray. It's a time for us to think and understand. He says, and now arise, O Elohim, Yahweh Elohim, to your resting place, to the ark of your strength. Let your priests, O Yahweh Elohim, be robed with deliverance, and let your kind ones rejoice in goodness. And this is the salutation that he's closing the prayer with. And Yahweh Elohim, do not turn away the face of your anointed. Remember the kind acts of your servant David. He reminded Yahweh to remember David. And it goes on back to probably to Abraham. Now, after Solomon prayed this prayer, he gets an answer. And this is the 7th chapter, 2 Corinthians, is the one that we need to really bear down on. He says, and when Solomon had ended praying, fire came down from the heavens and consumed the burnt offerings and the slaughterings, and the esteem of Yahweh filled the house. Yahweh accepted Solomon's prayer, manifested it in that place. And the priests were unable to enter the house of Yahweh because the esteem of Yahweh had filled the house of Yahweh. And all the children of Israel saw how the fire came down and the esteem of Yahweh on the house, and they bowed their faces to the ground on the pavement and did obeisance and gave thanks to Yahweh, saying, for he is good, for his kindness is everlasting. When we can pray that prayer, we can start getting attention from Yahweh. He says, 4th verse, and the sovereign of all the people were making offerings before Yahweh, and the sovereign Shlomo made an offering of 22,000 bulls and 120,000 sheep. Thus the sovereign and all the people dedicated the house of Elohim. Now that was a magnificent day, and all Israel was present to accomplish that, and it took a lot of meat. Verse 6, and the priests were standing over their duties, and the Levites with instruments of the song to Yahweh, which sovereign David had made to give thanks to Yahweh, saying, for his kindness is everlasting. whenever David praised by their hand, and the priests were blowing trumpets before them, and all Israel were standing. And Shlomo set apart the middle of the courtyard, and was in front of the house of Yahweh, for there he made burnt offerings and the fat of the peace offerings. Because the bronze altar which Shlomo had made was not able to contain the burnt offerings and the grain offerings and the fat. And Shlomo at that time observed the festival 7 days. They continued the festival 7 days, so it was after the one we're talking about today. And all Israel with him, a very great company, from the entrance of Hamath to the Wadi of Mitzrayim. And on the 8th day, they held an assembly. And that will come next week. For they performed the dedication of the altar 7 days, and the festival 7 days. And on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people away to their tents, rejoicing and glad of heart for the goodness that Yahweh had done for David and for Shlomo and for his people Israel. Yahweh is well pleased with Israel. He might have something against what they do, but he's well pleased with Israel. He says, thus Shlomo finished the house of Yahweh and the sovereign's house, and all that came into the heart of Shlomo to do in the house of Yahweh and in his own house, he properly executed. Now that's description. Now, with all this said and done, here's what happens. Verse 12, and Yahweh appeared to Shlomo by night and said to him, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a house of slaughtering. If I shut up the heavens and there is no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, and my people upon whom my name is called, listen to this carefully, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their evil ways, then shall I hear from the heavens and forgive their sin and heal their land. That's the answer to the prayer for America today. Now my eyes are opened and my ears attentive to the prayers of this place, and now I have chosen thee, set apart this house apart for my name to be there forever, and my eyes and my heart shall always be there. And it's not just the physical Jerusalem that he's talking about. He's talking about the heart of Israel, the people of Israel. All of the people of Israel is his heart. And you, if you walk before me as your father David walked, and do according to all that I have commanded you, and if you guard my laws and my right rulings, then I shall establish the throne of your reign as I covenanted with David your father, saying, there is not to cease a man of you as a ruler in Israel. But if you turn away and forsake my Torahs, my laws, and my commands, which I have set before you, and shall go and serve other mighty ones, and bow yourselves to them, then I shall pluck them from my land, which I have given them, and this house, which I have set apart for my name, I shall cast out of my sight, and make it to be a proverb and a mockery among the people. And he's done just that. He said, and this house, which has been exalted, everyone who passes by it shall be astonished and say, why has Yahweh done thus to this land and this house? And it's simply because of sin. Sin caused Yahweh to have to do it. He says, then they shall say, because they forsook Yahweh, Elohim their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim, and embraced other mighty ones, and bowed themselves and served them. Therefore, he has brought all this evil on them. And so that is the problem with the world today, specifically America. The greatest experiment in mankind trying to govern himself in the history of man, the most prosperity of any nation that's ever had in the history of man, and yet everybody is turning away from the truth. They need to think about what they're doing, look for Yahweh, ask Him to come back and find out that they are His people, and that they shall turn from their wicked ways and seek His face, and He will hear from heaven, and He will heal our land. May Yahweh bless and keep you.